there's something baked into our biology, into our personalities, that when push comes to shove, we feel like we have to choose. And maybe it's the fight or flight thing. Maybe it's the, maybe it's that built in us. But, some people want to well, let's just preserve the relationship, whatever it takes, right? And never mind if we don't set any boundaries or don't get anything done or don't meet our quarterly goals or don't talk to our employee about the grave performance deficits. Or maybe we're like, hey, when push comes to shove, you just bring the hammer down and you got to get stuff done. I don't care the consequences. We tend to go there, and it seems to be human nature. And so we've been exploring what's in that gap and how do we solve that?
Today's episode of the ProGuide is brought to you by Smallpond Productions, the producers of this podcast. If you're looking to boost your brand's voice with professional end-to-end podcast production, whether it's an interview show or telling stories with audio, we walk you through every step of the process to make you sound great. Head to our website and download the free Podcasting Made Simple guide, 8 critical things you need to know before launching your brand's podcast. It's all available at smallpond.productions. Well, welcome everybody to this episode of the ProGuide. I am so honored to be able to have Dr. Nate Regier here with us today. If you haven't heard of Nate, he's the CEO and founding owner of Next Element Consulting. It's a global leadership consulting and training firm helping build cultures of compassionate accountability. Now, Dr. Nate's the author of 4 books, including Compassionate Accountability: How Leaders Build Connection and Get Results. And this book shares how leaders no longer have to choose between relationships and results, and we're going to get into that. One last little detail too, he also hosts the On Compassion with Dr. Nate podcast. Dr. Nate, thank you so much for joining us. Just an excuse to hang out with you.
Oh, I know. Thanks, Andrew. It's great to have you on. Thanks for reaching out, and it's good to reconnect, and it's always great to riff on what's new and what's going on.
Yeah, and what a what's new that you've got. I mean, this is such a deep, rich work that you've got here, and I'd love to break into this a little bit. I think the place to start for me is how you frame compassionate accountability as this almost false tension. When you feel like, as a leader, sometimes I get so wrapped up in that either or choice of, man, either I get to be nice to people and people just doormat me all the time, or I don't take junk from anybody, but there's this just wake of dead bodies behind me. But boy, does he get crap done. Yeah. So where does that false choice come from? Just talk to me a little bit about that. Unpack that idea for us.
Well, you've certainly described the two ends of the spectrum really well. And we like to say that compassion without accountability gets you nowhere. You can't nice your way to the big decisions, the tough stuff, the hard behaviors. But the opposite is also a problem, which is accountability without compassion gets you alienated. I mean, these days, who wants to work for a boss that's bringing the hammer down all the time and expects that, well, you're getting a paycheck, so shut up and go back to work, So yeah, the two ends just absolutely are untenable anymore. But to your question, why do we go there? And, we've been studying human nature. I'm a recovering psychologist, and our team has been studying the nature of behavior and why people do what they do for a long, long time. And I think there's something baked into our biology, into our personalities, that when push comes to shove, we feel like we have to choose. And maybe it's the fight or flight thing. Maybe it's the, maybe it's that built in us. But, some people want to well, let's just preserve the relationship, whatever it takes, right? And never mind if we don't set any boundaries or don't get anything done or don't meet our quarterly goals or don't talk to our employee about the grave performance deficits. Or maybe we're like, hey, when push comes to shove, you just bring the hammer down and you got to get stuff done. I don't care the consequences. We tend to go there, and it seems to be human nature. And so we've been exploring what's in that gap and how do we solve that?
And early on in this book, you kind of bring in this extra dimension of this difference, and it's nuancy, but the difference between the words accountability and responsibility. And we sometimes interchange those ideas, but they're different. How so?
It's a great question, and people throw those words around all the time. And the way I like to say it is that we are accountable to other people. We are responsible for our behavior. So accountable means you have to account for it. So an accountant accounts for the numbers, but the accountant doesn't produce the numbers. They're not actually bringing in the money. They're not making the expenses. They're accounting for it all. So they have to answer to their executive team, to their board, to their constituents, but they're not actually producing the behavior. What are they responsible for? They're responsible for calculating the numbers accurately, having them ready on time, making the forecasts, and doing all of that stuff. They're not responsible for decisions on expenses. So when it comes to leadership and relationships, we have to be really careful. Who are we accountable to in our relationships, but what are we actually responsible for? And that's where it can get dicey.
It's a great distinction, though. I mean, I think making that distinction and being able to think of it when it counts is it sets you free. You know, it's very relieving to know, oh my gosh, I'm not responsible for everything. Talk to me about these. So let's say I'm on board with this idea. Okay, compassionate and accountable at the same time. So that's something that I'm capable of being. Us as leaders are capable of being. Maybe this is a skill set that I can work on, that I can become better in. Talk to me about this concept, the model itself. These 3 switches. One of them being responsibility. What do they unlock, and how do we kind of start looking at this thing, saying, okay, I'm sold. Let's go.
Well, we have to start by recognizing that putting compassion and accountability as somehow intention is the first problem. And that's a problem of the mind. It's not real. It's something that we find ourselves. So we have to accept that these two actually are the same thing. Compassion and accountability are one and the same. They need each other. You can't have one without the other. Great. Okay. Well, how do we have to shift our mindset? We have to think differently about these concepts. And I think it starts with us resetting how we view ourselves and other people, because compassion is about relationships and how we treat ourselves, but so is accountability. So what are the 3 fundamental resets? And this is where we start exploring the mindset. What is it? And we realize that there are 3 things you kind of have to turn on before you can make this work. And the 3 switches of the compassion mindset, like the 3 switches on my wall back here, are what allow energy to flow and allow energy to create amazing things, like turn the lights on. The ring light and the computer that we're using are powered because the switches are on. Those switches are value, capability, and responsibility. And these are the fundamental, I think, truths about humanity, is that humans are valuable. They're innately valuable because we're human. We are also capable. Humans are creative, agentic, smart creatures that want to build things and solve problems. And we bring skills and perspectives to the table. Humans are responsible because we live and work in communities and our behavior matters. And if you were on a desert island by yourself, you could do whatever you wanted, suffer your own consequences. Nobody ever has to deal with it. But because we work in teams and companies and communities, responsibility for our behavior matters. And so these 3 things are the 3 switches that all have to be turned on, and our behavior has to flow if we're going to practice compassionate accountability.
Man, well said. I so love this. And you don't get to a place of that level of well articulation without really kind of getting into the Play-Doh and messing with the stuff for a long time.
Or being on a lot of podcasts with great questions.
Like, man, the thoughts have been formulated so well.
Yeah.
I was surprised. I was reading through the reviews and kind of your self-bio for this book. And you mentioned this thing where it says you had a friend come up to you and say, Dr. Nate, I feel like you finally found your voice here. And you agreed with that. But I sat there thinking, like, this is book number 4. So, like, what to you was so special about him saying that to you, specifically in regards to this book? Because I know the other 3 are personal journeys, but this 4th one seems to have some sort of a special mark on it.
I'm so glad you asked. I don't get to talk about this very much, and so I appreciate it. My first book, Beyond Drama, was just like the scariest thing I ever did, trying to say, hey, I got a point of view on something. And is anybody even going to care,
Yes.
And we got that one out of the way. Then Conflict Without Casualties was, hey, we got a framework and a model. So when my mom read that book, she said, hey, Nate, she said, Nate, this is your faith journey. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She goes, look at the book. It's your entire faith journey. You're a missionary kid. You've been trying to find your purpose in your life. It's like, wow, I never even thought of that. Cool. Wow. The next book, Seeing People Through, is my exploration in writing a fable. So that was fun. But Compassion Accountability was when I think I finally were to the point where I'm comfortable enough in the Play-Doh that I am speaking from the heart and from 20 years of experience and a lifetime of figuring this stuff out. Not that this is the right solution, but it truly is me coming out.
Yes.
And I think I felt comfortable enough to write in my own voice because of the support of my team, because of the support of our clients, saying this is stuff needs to be in the world and needs to get out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And then I chose to do my own audio. I've not ever done it before. I did my own audio book because I was like, well, if this is my voice, I better speak it.
Yeah, it would feel weird having like compassionate accountability happening with Dr. Nate. Which I love that exactly what you say about speaking in your own voice. You hear like the stories come out of just different things, different situations and ideas that you've come to illustrate each of the chapters show up through your own experience. And you're like, hey, this is a different facet, a different angle of the diamond. Now I've changed it. Here's another angle of the diamond. You do a really good job of explaining the whole picture. I also love in chapter 10, you talk about barriers to compassion, or actually have a series of different chapters on that. And people think I can't have compassion on someone or a situation because I don't want them to become dependent on me. And that resonated with me, this idea. But you argue that that's not really even the case at all, that compassion actually means something different, to where it's not necessarily something where you have to worry about somebody just looking at you as the solution all the time, because that's the reason we don't enter into compassion, I think.
Well, that chapter, and interestingly enough, the section on all the 5 barriers to compassion was actually going to be in the front of the book. And the 6th barrier was, we see compassion and accountability as opposites. And several of my reviewers of the manuscript said, dude, you got to put the big idea at the front of the book. Don't wait till the end, and then put all those barriers at the end. So this chapter you're talking about is titled, it has to do with this theme of compassion is means to alleviate suffering. And I'm taking issue with that. Because yes, of course we want to get rid of suffering in the world. And of course we don't want injustice. I grew up in South Africa during apartheid. I understand why this is bad and we have to get rid of it. But in the average workplace, the average relationship, when we go to try to fix the problem, we're actually taking away the person's opportunity to learn and grow. When we go just say, here, let me fix it. Let me take away your suffering. Let me make your life easy. Or parents that say, I suffered so much growing up, so you're going to have everything that I didn't. What they aren't going to have then is self-discipline and appreciation and gratitude, because you've taken that away. So I think I really take issue with day-to-day practical compassion has to let people learn and grow and struggle in a safe place so that they can preserve their dignity, they can preserve their humanity, because everybody loves to learn something new. I mean, what little child, when you try to help them, like, no, me do it.
Yep.
Don't take that away from adults either.
Gosh, that's so good. As a recovering helicopter parent, I so just in the moment, so understand.
And nobody's off limits. I'm not kidding. Let's go for it.
Yeah, that's right. So Dr. Nate, I love that the ideas are encapsulated in this book. So it's fantastic that somebody, even as an individual, can start to practice this. But do you offer any solutions, any thought processes, ideas for people at scale? Because things get messy when people are in groups.
Yes. Well, and so many books about compassion or about leadership are so theoretical, and they just give all these principles, but people tell us, they're like, what do we actually do? I need to have a conversation today. I am having a meeting I don't know how to handle. So very, very practical. But really, we're into the business of culture transformation, and culture transformation requires mindset shift. It requires large-scale skill development. It requires thinking differently about your strategies, your processes, your procedures, how you do things. So we do a lot of assessment consulting and training and coaching with organizations to really take that whole organization, whole culture view on how to make that transformation.
Love it. Talk to me too about this, and this is a little bit of a rabbit hole, but along that same idea of this all or nothing thinking that we tend to fall into, where life is so much more nuanced and so much more gradiented in that. And you do a good job at the very beginning talking about the pendulum of compassion swinging back and forth. For those of us that see that happening in some areas of our life or in a lot of areas of our life, do you have any tips or ideas for how do we really help ourselves to really recognize that there are more gradients to a lot of things? And even in the moment when we tend to make that rash decision or think in terms of sound bites or say, I'm all this or I'm never that. Do you have any tips for just in the moment kind of catching yourself and saying, wait a minute, this is an opportunity for me to think about, this is a little bit more nuanced than that?
Yeah. Thank you. And, different parts of the book attempt to do that for different people in a different way. The part that says, look, compassion, accountability aren't opposites, that could be enough for people. It's like, wait, I don't have to choose. So maybe there's a third way. The section on barriers is like, wait, don't oversimplify this concept. It's richer and more nuanced than you think. But I think what could probably be the most useful for most people is this little guy right here. This is my original three switches.
Yes.
That I have a picture of it in the book, but this is the actual one. And it basically says when I'm under pressure, when I'm not thinking clearly, when I'm wanting to go to my, ends extremes, just ask myself, what would I do or say if I was valuable and you were valuable? What would I do or say if I was capable and you were capable? And what would I do or say if we were both responsible for what we do next? And sometimes that alone can make a crazy shift. And I share a story, a case study of a really angry, mean dad that was a patriarch of a business that could not let go, and how he treated his son in that moment when I asked him, what would you say if your switch of capability was turned on? And he just like that knew what to say, and it was the right thing.
That's so amazing too, to think like just acting as if you really do have access to all of that there. It's just there. It's just saying like, that whatever that thing that blocks us and saying, I'm not the kind of person who, but if I were, then that's it's just so cool to me. So cool. I'm a sucker for a good assessment. At the end of the book, you have an assessment. What should folks expect to find out if they took a few minutes with this compassionate accountability assessment? What should it show them, and maybe how could that help them?
What it will show people is where are the three switches positioned for them. And since the compassion mindset and full compassion accountability includes all three switches, this allows you to assess the position of each of those, because they do have a dimmer, by the way. They're not just on or off. They have dimmers. They're sophisticated. Where is the switch for you? And if you choose, you can answer, where is the switch for my team or my boss? What about my whole culture? Where is our culture? So this gives you an ability in a kind of a rough way to assess the level of compassion accountability on these three dimensions for different areas of your life, which lets you know where you are, where you maybe want to set goals, where you want to work, and why you might be having the problems that you're having in your organization or your team or your relationships.
Do you have any other stories? The illustration of the dad was fantastic. Do you have any other illustrations or stories where you kind of look to that as maybe like a proud moment, like this? I know this, not that I didn't know it would work before, but like now that I've kind of run this model through the ringer, we've made sure that it's working. There's not 7 switches, there's 3. We've really got this thing all set. Was there a moment, or was there a time where you remember looking back and thinking like, okay, this worked for them in that specific scenario? Do you mind sharing just an example of when kind of the light bulb came on for somebody?
Probably the one that was really rewarding for me was a case study that's in the book. The organization was Stormont Vail Health, big regional health system, and we were working with them around this. And they were so inspired by these three switches as saying, this is the kind of a culture we want. So we need to go back and revisit our entire mission, vision, values, and guiding principles through this lens. And so they revised and edited and upgraded their principles to specifically speak to these three switches. What do we mean by it? How we're going to keep them on through our behaviors, and why it's important to our mission. Now, execution, of course, is more than just putting it on page. But for the top leaders to say it matters so much that we keep all three of these in mind, I think means a lot, because there is thousands of lives that are impacted by the decisions and the behaviors of those leaders based on those values.
I feel like this has always been, not always, but for a long time been in your mind to become a book at some point. Do you have a moment, or just was it kind of a grading of time where it's just like, I know the time is now to write this thing. It's got to be now.
Well, we created the compassion mindset and the three switches and a discrete enterprise level training program in 2019, right before COVID hit. And it was just a training program. And then in about 21 or 22, my publisher reached out and said, hey, it's about time for a second edition of Conflict Without Casualties. And I started working on it. We got reviews. I was starting to actually do it. And then COVID was really heating up. and the pendulum of compassion was getting beat around, and you watched our country, watched our world, the divisiveness and just what happened there. And our team just felt like the universe was telling us that we need to change course and get this model and this framework out there to give people a vision for what could be next and how we need to reset and how we're going to deal with these issues of like return to work or remote work or, these big issues. Where does the whole inclusion belonging, where does it end in a company? What do we do? Like, what's the next thing? And so we stopped everything and we put the book together in like 4 months, fastest we've ever written a book. But it's because it needed to come and we had been thinking about it and working on it. So, I literally called the publisher and said, "Can you stop the press? Like, we need to stop it." And
that moment. I was just talking to somebody earlier about the divisiveness. They're very interested in the idea of tensions as they manifest in leadership and this idea that we subscribe to one side or the other and why does it have to be that way? And just there's no question the world needs this message right now. So for anybody that's out there that's thinking like, man, where is the humanity gone? And I'm looking for something just to kind of restore a bit of that let's treat each other like humans kind of a thing. This is the direction you should head. Compassionate accountability. Dr. Nate, any final words of wisdom before I let you go? The floor is yours, honestly. Anything that you would have to say where it's just like, hey, this is what I'm thinking and feeling these days.
Yeah. There's a bit of a backstory and there's a bit of a thread that kind of culminated here. And this is this whole idea of drama, conflict, difference. And here's what I've come to believe, Andrew, is that differences and diversity of any kind in our world, whether it's diversity of human beings, diversity of life on this planet, diversity of thought, is part of the grand design of the universe. Like, whatever you believe in terms of why we're here or who made us, diversity was baked in on purpose from the beginning, and we need it to thrive and survive and innovate. So if you believe that, then you can't argue that conflict is also part of the grand design of the universe, because conflict is inherent. I mean, the pearl comes because the sand got into the shell and the oyster was like really uncomfortable and had to deal with that. Right. And so it's the process of that conflict that produced the pearl. So conflict must have a purpose. It must not be bad. However, what I've also come to realize is conflict is the energy source. It is the greatest source of energy on earth because diversity is baked in from the beginning. So conflict is what's sitting on the other side of those 3 switches. And that's every switch in my house has 110 volts, or I don't know how many volts coming in, ready to do something amazing. If I do the wrong thing with it, I could electrocute myself and die. I could start fires with it. I could electrocute people, whatever. That's drama. So the 3 switches is how we steward the energy of conflict to create, because that's what humans are meant to do. Is we are here to create, not destroy. And so diversity creates conflict. Conflict is the energy source for creating anything on this earth or destroying it. And the 3 switches are how we make that happen.
Holy moly. For somebody advocating against sound bites, you just gave me so many good ones. That was amazing. That's awesome. Dr. Nate, I'm so grateful to be able to just even spend this amount of time with you. Share with us how folks can not only connect with you, but just see what you're up to these days too.
Well, thank you. And since we've thrown the phrase compassion accountability around, we've created an easy one, Compassionate Accountability Book. If you type that in, you'll find us. You can type my name in, you'll find me. We are at next-element.com is our company name. Any of those should get you to the same place.
That's beautiful. Dr. Nate, this has been awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Andrew. Thanks for the opportunity.
And our thanks to all of you for listening. If you're looking for a quick way to make our day, a review in iTunes or subscribing to this podcast would mean the world to us. Our thanks to Smallpond Productions for sponsoring. And this was the ProGuide. Learn from leaders, change your life. See you, everybody.